of course, let's not forget that there are other runners and riders for this title of the Champions League. And amongst them, I think it's fair to say, are Barcelona, Bayern Munich, who we'll come to in a moment or two, and Inter, dare I say, as well. Can we start talking about Barcelona, though? I suppose I'm surprised that they're not being talked of in the same way as Real Madrid. Once upon a time, it was like Real Madrid or Barcelona are going to win this, but yet they're not quite on that level yet, are they?
I guess Barcelona, not only because of their historical standing in the competition next to Real Madrid, which is obviously inferior, it almost feels as if Barcelona need to rebuild our confidence in them over recent years in the Champions League. And I think this is the first year, probably since Luis Enrique was at Barcelona, that you feel this is a convincing team with enough invention, with enough dash, with enough daring that they could actually get it done. Now, of course, I think when we look at Hansi Flick, I think because Barcelona have had diminished circumstances and because they weren't able to compete for every top coach out there in the summer, I think people look at Hansi Flick and they maybe forget he's a Champions League winner as well. And that's really shown, I think, in the way that they've played this season. They have played at times this season some unbelievably reckless football, but my God, it is good to watch. And I think that is the thing that I think convinces me about Barcelona. The fact that they're not scared of anyone, and I think the key match in the group stage is you go back to the Bayern game. They never beat Bayern. Like, they never beat Bayern. They didn't only beat them, they absolutely thrashed them, and they didn't blink. And I think that was really, really important going back to October. That gave them a huge boost going forward into this competition. Obviously, they were great in the group stages. They needed to lean on their goalkeeper in the away leg of this game against Benfica. Wojciech Szczesny was brilliant, I thought, in the away game against Benfica, which, you know, could have been another 5-4, but because of him wasn't. But they were, even though Benfica had a proper go in this, like, Barcelona just had that little bit more poise. I just wonder, Nicky, with Barcelona, because they're so much more attractive than they have been in decent seasons, are they a genuine contender to win this title? Or are we believing because we want to believe because they are so attractive?
I've been having this puzzle with myself recently. And I was thinking again when I was watching Aston Villa, oddly, and the goals they scored last night. And maybe it's because of also seeing the Italian teams and the way they exit the competition. But I've just been having this real feeling of football all becoming almost greatly simplified in my head again, back to all the complicated tactics and everything else you talk about. You've got to be able to stick the ball in the net. Like, you've got to be good at doing that to win knockout ties. And just when I watch Barcelona, it's like, yeah, but of course they've always got a chance. Because look, you've got flipping Yamal. Like, of course you've got a chance to win this game because he can do it on his own if he needs to. And then you don't actually need him to on his own because you've also got Lewandowski, because you've also got Rafinha. You've got players who can stick the ball in the net. And yes, it is more complicated than that. And yes, we've just spent a big part of the last section talking about how well Atletico Madrid neutralise the pace of that Real Madrid attack and don't let them run at them. And you think, can this Barcelona team do that? No, I don't really think they can. Do I think they could score more goals than Real Madrid? Evidently. I mean, it's right now happening in La Liga, right? So
I mean, that is the interesting thing hanging over the rest of this competition, that they've given Real Madrid some proper hidings recently.
Yeah,
that's the interesting thing. But could they do it in a Champions League context?
Of course they can. Whether they will, that's the tricky part of the question.
That is the question. If there is one question over Barcelona, it's that they are this reckless. It's that they are this open. It's the opposite of what we were describing with PSG. And I guess we're going to find out over the next couple of games, aren't we? You know, how serious they actually are. I mean, I kind of think with Borussia Dortmund next up, that should be pretty open and shut, really. And I know you can say Dortmund in the Champions League, etc., but come on, this season's Dortmund. You know, they should be making short work of them. But we get our answer in the semi-final.
Well, and talking of teams that maybe are much more disciplined, and you don't expect them to throw games away. Inter,
I know, and I feel like, because again, things we were chatting about just before we came on, like I think Andy wants me to come in and fight hard for Inter as a contender in this Champions League, and that's often a thing that I do. And they absolutely are a contender in this Champions League, and you can look at the recent history and say, well, they went to the final 2 years ago. Last season they lost to Atletico Madrid on penalties in a tie they should never have lost. They should have got through that tie before it ever got to penalties.
Especially the first leg, right?
Yeah, exactly, and they are absolutely capable of playing toe to toe with anyone in Europe, in my opinion. And in this whole Champions League, I think they've trailed for about 3 minutes, which was at the end of that game in the groups against Leverkusen, which they lost. They don't
285 seconds.
There you go. They don't concede goals. They've got all of the quality that they've had the last couple of seasons. They didn't really add that much in the summer, or certainly it hasn't had that much impact. You look at Taremi and Jelinski, haven't necessarily had a huge impact, but the quality they had is still there. And above all, I think you could see even in the last this week in the Champions League, they have great depth, because even when you suffer an injury crisis at left back, you've got players like Bastoni who are so used to playing in this fluid system that they can shift and they can adapt. And the team is so adaptable because of the way that they play, because they are constantly swapping positions and breaking lines and not playing in a rigid way. I think Inzaghi is absolutely capable of coming up with game plans to beat anyone. But here's the big but for me. I'm watching this team week by week, and to me, they have looked tired. They've looked tired in the second half of the season. They look like they are not quite playing their best football. They're still playing good football. They're not playing their best football.
I mean, arguably, that's what's undercut Liverpool, isn't it?
Yeah.
They weren't at their absolute peak when they played PSG. Still very good, obviously, but I do feel at least part of their Premier League lead at the moment is due to the shortcoming of others, because maybe it's just impossible to keep up the way they played in the first half of this season.
Yeah, and Inter haven't got that luxury. They're playing an incredibly competitive league season with teams breathing down their neck, and they're playing another one this weekend. And they have got, bears repeating, they've got the oldest average starting 11 in Serie A, and they use the joint fewest players of any team in Serie A. Those two things over the course of a season have some impact. And I think that, again, if I'm backing a manager to find the best solutions there's very few I'd take over Inzaghi. I just think when you get to the end of this competition, you need to be playing your best football, and I don't believe that Inter are playing their best football.
With that in mind, I mean, before we get to the best football bit, I think the thing that made me sort of back on board with Inter a little bit was the way they dealt with the first leg at the Calp. I think that was the important bit. That was the bit at which they won the tie. And Milan, obviously, relatively recently had gone there and made such a mess of it against Feyenoord. And Inter looks so much more poised, so much more controlled. The sort of display that has really got them into being a serious Champions League contender in the last couple of years. And what I think is interesting is the sort of stuff that Beppe Marotta has said about the evolution of Inter, and he's been quite clear to say it's not a revolution. We're not going to change everything in the summer. But you talked about the age of the squad there, Nicky, and often teams move in sort of 3-year cycles, don't they? Now, and this is still an if you make them reaching the Champions League final against Manchester City the first of those 3 years, and you make last year the second one where they've got a better team, much better team than the year before, but they find a way, as you say, of losing to Atletico in the last 16. Is this the third year? Is this team's last go at the Champions League together, which is clearly an itch they really want to scratch, because they felt they should have done much better last season?
Yeah, that's a tough question, because, of course, it depends on so many things. It depends on which players stay and go, of course. And I haven't currently got any reason to believe that, for instance, your biggest players, that Lautaro's about to leave. But there's a second element to that, which I think is absolutely real, and that's about the energy of players and how much buy-in you get from them. And I think that's why you see some managers struggle to go on after the third season, and others go, okay, when you've got to tear things up and start all over again. And I suppose the Italian example of the person who's best at doing that is probably Gasperini at Atalanta, who tears things up constantly, and that creates a situation where no one ever gets complacent. Everyone's always, even to view it from one side, you can make the argument that there's the potential upside to this. What on the outside looks like a horrendous mess he's made with Ademola Lookman this season is, well, he did it with Papu Gomez, who was the captain and the best player. You made a fight with him, got rid of him, and the team somehow evolved and kept getting better. And maybe Inzaghi after the season will have to think about a more drastic overhaul. I mean, they brought on a couple of teenagers late in this game, so they are at least gesturing towards doing new things. But it's an old team, and there are some pieces in there that you look at and you think, how long are you going to keep leaning on the likes of Mkhitaryan? How long are you going to keep leaning on the likes even of a Çalhanoğlu? No, I'm not saying that this is the end of Çalhanoğlu and we're at the end of that. That's ridiculous. He's still a player who's... But
they are reaching a certain age. Yeah. You can't ignore that.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting, I think, because going into this quarter-final with Bayern, I would say they are still the favourites for this quarter-final.
Why not Bayern?
Because if there's a reason to be convinced, Dotun, it's off the back of these two games against Leverkusen. And I don't know if that's a bit of recency bias, to be honest, because before that, they've been really unconvincing in the Champions League, Bayern, particularly away from home. You know, I think you look at the defeats at Villa in particular, the one at Feyenoord, which was a total mess. Now, of course, they've got past that, but have they been convincing enough over these two games? And they've been very convincing against Leverkusen to make me think they're a genuine contender. I think they've convinced themselves that they could be. There's no doubt about that. Now, Kane's brilliant over the two legs. Musiala is brilliant over the two legs. And it's interesting. We've spoken so much, you know, we're sort of searching for Ballon d'Or candidates left and right at the moment. And, you know, I spent definitely a part of this season talking about Florian Wirtz until his injury. I kind of feel that it was interesting of all the things that Bayern and Bayern adjacent people did to try and unsettle Leverkusen before the first leg of this tie. You had Karl-Heinz Rummenigge coming out and saying, well, yeah, of course, Bayern want to buy Florian Wirtz. You know, he's the best player in Germany. And obviously, Simon Rolfes, the sporting director of Leverkusen, responds to that and says, I know what you're doing. You're trying to unsettle us. It's really distasteful. But actually, if I'm Jamal Musiala, I'm saying, sorry, who's the best player in Germany? I beg your pardon? Yes. And he played in these two legs. He was amazing, Musiala. Now, I tend to think Musiala and Wirtz, you can't really separate them because they come as a package, especially for the German national team. Now, Julian Nagelsmann has created this environment where these two brilliant number 10s can play together. That could be the best thing that he's done as coach of Germany. It could be his real legacy going forward, depending on how long he keeps the job and what they're able to achieve over the next couple of tournaments. But it is interesting to see Musiala, who's just signed his big new contract, of course, saying, right, look, me and Florian are friends, but come on, you know, I'm this good and I'm going to prove it in these massive games.
But he's not like that, is he? He's much more modest than that as a kid.
Well, maybe he doesn't say it out loud, but he said what he needed to say with his performances. He was fantastic in both legs. Now, of course, I don't think this is the strongest Leverkusen at the moment. I think tactically they got it completely wrong. Xabi Alonso got it completely wrong in the first leg, as we've discussed. And then, of course, Florian Wirtz gets injured between the two games. And how you're meant to, come back from a 3-0 defeat in the first game, and B, you're meant to do it without your best player, I think it's really hard. But Bayern did handle the second leg very well. And if there's one thing, we talked about teams defending properly, even if they've looked a bit leaky away from home in the Champions League, that they set that right in this away leg. So I guess if we look at the two games against Leverkusen overall, you think that the first one is where Bayern win the tie, and I think that's a reasonable argument. However, the second one, in which they keep them at arm's length, they defend sensibly, and it's a really, really good away performance. If there's a point that you're going to buy into Bayern, maybe it's that.
I think there's something like a game within a game that I'm really fascinated for with this Bayern-Inter tie that I think actually calls back a bit again to what I was just saying about age. I don't know why his name didn't pop into my head when I was talking about aging Inter players, but Francesco Acerbi, for me, has been one of the absolute best centre-backs in Europe for a couple of years at just neutralising if you've got a classic number 9. He's not the perfect for every game, but if you want someone who's going to just cancel out your opponent's number 9. I think you look at the Champions League final against Manchester City, where Haaland didn't have nearly as much of an impact you would have expected the season he was having. That was Acerbi. Happened again in the group stage this season, where it was the 0-0. He completely kept Haaland quiet for the whole game. And I think that him against Harry Kane is right away like one of the matchups I have circled in this, like, okay, how's that going to go out? But Acerbi is 37 now, and Harry Kane scored 10 goals this season. Is he still at that level where he can just cancel someone out like that?
I think it's a great question, but I think that the add-on to that question is, he is a classic number 9, Harry Kane. He's also a classic number 9 who can drop to the centre circle and make the passes that can kill you.
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing. And does he, is he allowed to do that, or does Acerbi go with him and make a massive load of space behind him?